everyone, welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. US President Donald Trump threatened escalating tariffs on key European allies unless the US is allowed to buy Greenland. Duties would start at 10% on February 1 and rise to 25% by June. European leaders rejected the demand, warning it could damage NATO unity, derail trade deals, and deepen transatlantic tensions. Syrian government forces advanced into Kurdish-held areas near the Euphrates, taking Tabqa and key dams despite US calls to stop. Kurdish-led SDF accused the army of violating a withdrawal deal and warned it would fight to hold remaining towns and oil fields. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei accused President Trump of fueling deadly protests that killed over 3,000 people. Khamenei called Trump a criminal, while Iran blamed the unrest on US and Israeli interference amid mass arrests and internet shutdowns. European Union and Mercosur leaders have signed the landmark free trade agreement in Paraguay after 25 years of negotiations, paving the way for what would become the European Union's largest ever trade deal. The accord covers the European Union with Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, but still requires approval from the European Parliament. New York City Mayor Mamdani has appointed Tricia Shimamura as the city's new Parks Department Commissioner, tasking her with managing more than 30,000 acres of land. Mamdani praised Shimamura's decade-long record of public service, while Shimamura called the role an honor and vowed to make a difference. According to IMF statements, the International Monetary Fund has approved a $261 million disbursement for Ethiopia after completing the fourth review of its 48-month extended credit facility, bringing total IMF support under the program to just over $2.18 billion. Syria's Communications Minister Abdul Salam Haikal said internet users can now access the Google Play Store without a VPN and that most Google services are expected to return to Syria soon. The restoration follows the removal of Syria from the US Treasury's off-air sanctions last year. According to a Department of Justice letter filed with Judge Paul Engelmeyer, the US Justice Department has urged a New York federal judge to reject lawmakers Ro Khanna and Thomas Massey's push for a special master to oversee the release of Jeffrey Epstein-related files. All right, viewers, let's start with news now from Greenland, which has commended the swift and strong reactions from European countries targeted by US President Donald Trump's new tariff threats. In a LinkedIn post, a minister from the region stated that she is amazed to witness the first responses from the targeted countries, adding that she was thankful and hopeful for diplomacy and allyship to prevail. This came after Trump threatened to impose tariffs on imports from 8 European nations that send troops to Greenland, a Danish territory Trump has expressed interest in controlling. Trump's announcement included a 10% tariff on goods from Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the UK, the Netherlands, and Finland, set to begin on February 1. The tariffs could rise to 25% and remain in place until a deal is reached. Trump emphasized that Greenland is critical to US security and has not ruled out taking control of the territory by force, stating Greenland is of strategic importance to the US. European leaders have widely condemned the tariff threats, calling them unacceptable. Professor Rohan Gunratna, who is an international affairs expert from Singapore, joins me in this discussion. Professor, thanks very much for joining. Professor, what do what does this say about the transatlantic alliance now?
Certainly, the transatlantic alliance faces a very sustained risk of disruption And what is so important for most Americans and most Europeans and their governments is that they maintain that partnership for the security and stability of the countries across the Atlantic. And if that alliance is disrupted because of Greenland, it will build more insecurity. So I think that most Americans, American congressmen, whether they are Republican or Democrat, they have understood this, and they are opposed to President Trump's view of annexing Greenland. And also most European nations and European public are dismayed, and they want to work with the United States, but they oppose this particular position adopted by President Trump. In my personal view, President Trump himself will realize that he should not push his desire to annex Greenland, because that's going to disrupt a very long, close partnership, not only with Europe, but with our eyes, that is the national security arrangement they have with Australia, Canada, with the UK and with New Zealand. So the Five Eyes arrangement itself will be compromised. So it's a question of time that President Trump, I believe, will take a step back. But it needs time and it needs patience, and it also needs the European leaders to work very closely with the Trump administration rather than get disappointed and annoyed and get into a fight.
Sure. Do you see the European nations retaliating if Trump does not stop from these threats?
Europe is a very small entity with limited power compared to the United States. US is a hyperpower. No European country or even a grouping of European countries can come close to the United States. So I think the US best not get into a fight or a conflict or a confrontation with President Trump at this time.
Okay. So what really is a challenge that now faces the European Union other than the tariffs threat?
Europeans should continue to engage the United States, should continue to work with the Congress, should work very closely with President Trump.
Okay, first one.
Professor, please do continue. Sorry for those interruptions.
So my personal view is that the European nations should continue to work with the national security advisors to President Trump, should work with the US Congress, and should work with President Trump personally, because if they are able to convince him, he will agree. There are many decisions President Trump wanted to take in the past. For example, he wanted to relocate the people in Gaza, but he changed his mind after many leaders convinced him not to do so. Similarly, President Trump wanted to attack the regime in Iran, and that also he changed his mind the last weekend. So I think that President Trump is very theatrical and very triumphant, but sometimes he will review his views and change his position.
All right, sure. Professor, do stay on with me as we proceed. Viewers, U.S. Special Envoy Tom Barrack has met the head of the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, Mazloum Abdi, in Erbil in Iraq. The talks come at a tense moment after days of fighting between Syrian government troops and Kurdish forces near Aleppo and along the Euphrates. According to reports, the Syrian army has taken control of the northern city of Tabqa and key dams. Kurdish authorities say the army breached a withdrawal deal and pushed into areas not covered by the agreement. Meanwhile, the U.S. Central Command has urged Syrian government forces to refrain from attacks in the area between Aleppo and the city of Al-Tabqa in Raqqa province. Request Professor to join me back in this with his first comments.
What we have seen is that Ahmad al-Shara, known as Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, is an Islamist, and he has created a lot of trouble for the Christians, for the Shias, that is the Alawites, and for the Druze, and now he is targeting the Kurds. So it is so important for the European countries, for the Americans, for the Arab world, and other countries to tell him to stop ill-treating the minorities. If he uses his army, which is largely HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the same group that broke away from ISIS to target the Christians, the Druze, the Alawites, and the Kurds, he cannot create a beautiful and a productive country. So a country should be judged by the way it treats its minorities. He has poorly treated all those communities, and he has to come out of his mindset of being an Islamist, of advancing Sharia law, of trying to control those communities. He should create a truly democratic country where there is sufficient space for those minorities, whether they are communities, whether they are ethnic groups or religious groups, to live harmoniously with one another. So if he's not going to do that, I believe even the United States and the Europeans will abandon him, and eventually the Arabs themselves will realize he's not the right man to rule Syria.
Professor, if you allow me one final question before I let you go. How do you see the US role here? Because it's also backing the Syrian government, then it's also meeting with the Kurdish group, both of these sides. Do you see US rightfully in a position to mediate?
Yes, the US is the only country that can effectively mediate, because the United States has removed the sanctions against Syria. United States invited, President Trump invited Ahmad al-Shara to the White House. And of course, the United States can lobby other countries and tell them to tell Ahmad Shara to behave himself properly. So I believe that US is the most important partner when it comes to disciplining and moderating the conduct of Ahmad al-Shara.
All right, then thanks very much, Professor, for joining me in this discussion. Moving ahead now, viewers, let's cover some news from Davos, where hundreds of people marched from Koblenz in southeastern Switzerland to Davos on Saturday, protesting against capitalism, climate change, and the policies of the World Economic Forum, with slogans like democracy rather than WEF dictatorship. Activists called for a more democratic economy. The participation of US President Donald Trump in next week's World Economic Forum meeting made the protest even more relevant, according to organizers. Many participants, including African activist Masa Kuni, slammed the WEF for its role in worsening poverty and inequality worldwide. With half the demonstrators coming from Switzerland and others from Europe and Africa, the march reflected a global discontent with the WEF's decision-making. Anti-Trump sentiments were also strong, with demonstrators calling for Trump to face accountability. Let's listen in.
Uns ist das Anliegen, dass wir eine Gegenstimme sein können gegen das WEF, dass wir aufzeigen können, dass die Entscheidungen, die dort gefällt werden, nicht demokratisch sind, dass dort viele Interessen vertreten werden, die nicht unsere Interessen sind, sondern die von Konzernen, von LobbyistInnen. Und darum finden wir es wichtig, dass wir unseren Protest ins Herz von Davos als WEF tragen. Ich denke, es gibt uns mehr Druck. Ich denke, es bestätigt das, was wir seit Jahren sagen, was wir davon warnen, für das, was wir einstehen. Trump ist ein Symbol für, in unseren Augen ein Symbol für den Kapitalismus, wie er existiert und von dieser zerstörerischen Natur, die der Kapitalismus auch hat.
All right, I have with me Sharath Kohli, senior economist from New Delhi, joining in this discussion. Thanks very much, sir, for joining me. Firstly, do take our viewers through what these protesters are saying. What are the concerns being raised against the World Economic Forum, a forum that's been going on for years? What now has irked the protesters?
Greetings, Kriti, to you and NewsX World viewers. I think Donald Trump doesn't seem to be a very popular global leader at this point of time. His economic policies, especially the tariffs, he's known more as Donald Tariff than Donald Trump, because there were tariffs levied on Switzerland as well, we all know, and that's why you see these protesters from Switzerland. Well, these two economies, Switzerland and America and so many other countries, they had groomed those relations over so many decades. And suddenly Donald Trump comes and imposes tariffs, disturbing the whole ecosystem of international trade. So I think that's what the protest is, that US is being very selfish. The fact that US is pulled out of 66 organizations around the world, Kriti, out of them 31 UN organizations and 35 non-UN organizations. And these organizations were involved in public welfare. They were involved in charitable work. They were involved in a lot of work which was helping the communities around the world. So the US having pulled out, and World Economic Forum, we should not forget, has been slightly biased, because out of the 3,000 odd delegates coming there from 130 countries, 300 of them are expected from the US. And with President Trump coming as well. So obviously it is the biggest delegation. So there's a lot of say which US has in World Economic Forum. So obviously when there's a bigger delegation, I mean, you have the President of the United States, POTUS for that matter, coming. Obviously, the opinions are going to be biased, because he's not going to allow any counter opinion to come to the fore. And World Economic Forum, I mean, coming from the world of economics, Kriti, I can tell you, World Economic Forum has been more about photo ops, more about discussions, more about symposium being held, sideline talks, but nothing concrete has come out, especially on the climate front.
Yeah.
Especially when the US has pulled out of the climate accords. We all know that US has pulled out of most of the climate accords. So I think there's no point of holding such a major event at an expense when nothing substantial comes out. It just becomes a holiday in the snow, and you get some pictures, you get to meet celebrities, people here and there, a bit of networking. But nothing substantial comes out. The world economy at this point of time, Kriti, is growing at mere 2.5%. A lot of developed economies are on the verge, either they are in recession or they are on the verge of recession. So in such a situation, if World Economic Forum can come out with a solution to pull out the world and the developed part of the world, so-called developed part of the world, from this recessionary trend, I think it will be helpful. Otherwise, this kind of gathering once in a year in snow-clad mountains doesn't really make any sense, except for generating some media attention. As I said, some photo ops, photo shoots, some reels being made here and there. Nothing very
and
substantial.
more than that,
personally.
there are also allegations on the World Economic Forum of, perpetuating inequality, of, giving further push to neoliberal capitalism. What can really be done to address this? Because like you said, many are saying that World Economic Forum is not delivering anything concrete, but just delivering those photo op moments, some leader giving some talks on health, on mental health. But this is an economic forum that we all must remember.
So without sounding racist, Kriti, I must say that World Economic Forum has been dominated by the Western world. So countries coming from the global South, Africa, Southeast Asia, countries coming from a not so prosperous economic background, they are heard. It's not that they are not heard, but then it doesn't get converted to action, as I said. And there's an old saying that actions speak louder than words. So there are a lot of words spoken there, but the focus is on capitalism. The focus is on the growth of how the industry prospers, not how the community prospers. So if you're focusing on how the industry expands, how the business expands, well, it's World Economic Forum. It's not World Industry Forum. So when you use the World Economic Forum, you include industry, businesses, and communities as well. I think communities have been sidelined and countries from lesser prosperous backgrounds have been sidelined. I got no qualms in saying that, Kriti.
Sure. Okay. As far as Trump is concerned and his threat of tariffs now to the entire world, really, what do you think is really required to tame this bully?
I think he had a very dear friend in NATO, and America was one of the founding members of NATO, and Europe was one of the closest friends of America. But what he's done on Greenland recently, his possessiveness about Greenland, and when he says, I'm going to take it hard way or the soft way, I think this has irked the Scandinavian countries, Denmark and UK, Germany, France, which were closest allies of US. They have deputed their symbolic military in Greenland. And in retaliation, he has declared 10% tariffs on them. So when you can start imposing tariffs on your own friends who've been allies for years and years, I think that speaks volumes that US is trying to alienate itself. US is trying to distance itself. US probably thinks it's coming from some other world. I mean, I'm hesitating to use the word US. I should say President Trump, because he's been trying to distance himself from all the friends that America has made over so many years. And it's a very sad situation when I found that he imposed tariffs on UK. Well, UK has been a yes man of US. They've been saying yes to everything. They were amongst the first to do a trade deal. And with this Greenland, he's now declared 10% tariffs on US, France, Germany. So who's actually US's friend? I think President Trump will have to spell out that who's actually an ally of US. If you ask me, one word answer is no one.
Okay, sure. Mr. Kohli, please to stay on with me as we proceed. Viewers, to bring you some news from South Korea, now presidential office spokesperson has said that the country will seek favorable terms for US tariffs on imports of memory chips. Last year, South Korea had released a joint fact sheet on its trade deal with the US that included terms ensuring that South Korea will not receive unfavorable treatment from US tariffs on imported chips as compared to key competitors. Meanwhile, South Korean Trade Minister Yo Han-koo has said that US tariffs on some advanced computing chips would have a limited impact on South Korean companies. However, South Korea's Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix are among the world's biggest memory chip producers. Request Mr. Kohli to join me back and start with his first comments.
Well, I think Samsung and SK Hynix, the kind of chips they supply, we should not forget that there's NVIDIA in the US who are making chips, but they are of different kind. So the chips coming from Samsung and SK Hynix, they complement the chips chips being made by NVIDIA. So it is US's need to have these chips. That's why South Korea is seeking a favorable deal. But I must tell you, Kriti, here at this point of time, that it's becoming harder and harder to deal with US because the unpredictability of the trade is so high that every country doesn't know what's going to happen tomorrow, because there's a different opinion expressed today, then tomorrow it changes, day after it changes, the situation changes. So there is no consistency, there is no stability when anyone is dealing with US these days. I think that is what is making these comments come from South Korea, and I'm sure it's on the minds of the South Korean leaders that they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, even if they make them agree today for a favorable I would say tariff structure on the chips. Well, they don't know what President Trump may dislike, and he will say, fine, I'm going to impose another 10% tariffs. But the fact of the matter is that the way US is progressing on NVIDIA and the way US is progressing on artificial intelligence and related equipments, I think it will find very hard to do without the chips being imported from Samsung or SK Hynix. Even if TSMC in Taiwan is fulfilling the requirement to a certain extent, but the chips being made by SK Hynix and Samsung are unique and needed by AI data, a push which the US is giving to its industry.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Mr. Kohli, for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on NewsX World. Moving ahead, viewers, there's some news now coming in from Greece. Now, a fire broke out near fuel storage facilities in Parama, west of Athens, in a densely populated area. The mayor of Parama says the flames rose as high as 20 meters along the main avenue, prompting authorities to issue a 112 emergency alert for residents. Firefighters rushed to the scene and managed to bring the blaze under control, Officials say the fire came dangerously close to fuel tanks located less than 500 meters from homes, which could have caused a massive explosion. Authorities continue to monitor the area to ensure the fire is fully extinguished and no further risks remain. And that's all we have time for. Thanks for watching NewsX World. For all international news and updates.